My name is Sena Wazer. I am currently a master's student at Yale School of the Environment in the Environmental Management program. I'm from Mansfield, Connecticut, although I currently live in New Haven, and I've been a climate activist for about 7 years.
Sena, knowing that you have been already a climate activist for quite a while, I would love to hear a little bit about your climate activism and what, as far as you can tell, kind of sent you in the direction of being so active so young.
Yeah, for sure. I've been doing some form of environmental work for most of my life, but in 2018, I was 14 years old. And that year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released this big report about climate change, and it broke a lot of headlines and really made a lot of news. And I think one of the really big things that came out of that report and that stuck out to me at the time was kind of a timeline for addressing climate change. And so at the time, they said that we had about 12 years to prevent the worst consequences of the climate crisis. And that timeline has unfortunately really shrunk over time, even from the initial kind of period that they gave. But I think the piece of that really got to me was that 12 years because, yeah, I was 14. And so my mind kind of immediately went to how old will I be in 2030? How old will my little sister be? And that was really frightening. And so I think that very quickly kind of drove me towards doing whatever I could because it really made clear to me how this crisis will shape the rest of my life in really direct ways. So
yeah, absolutely. And now down the road, 8 years from there, how and even if it's just picking up right where you left off, what is the appreciation that what are some of the things that stand out to you, having gained the experience, knowledge, perspective that you have since that kind of galvanizing moment? What stands out to you at this point in time?
Yeah, but there are a lot of directions I feel like I could go with this. But I guess, I'm 21 now, so I think in some ways that piece around timeline is still very much there. And my sister's 19, she's in college, and kind of thinking about what does this look like for the rest of our lives? And as we're thinking about kind of careers also, what does it mean? That is definitely still there. But I think the other piece that feels a lot more present now is I think for in the past, maybe it was possible to view climate change as a thing that would either happen in the future or would happen elsewhere. And it felt or it could feel kind of impersonal. And I think now it feels very personal. And I mean, that's true for me, but I think true more broadly as well, because, things like Hurricane Helene or the wildfires that we saw in LA, those make it very clear that this is here now. And I think in Connecticut, we're seeing that too with, different weather patterns and more extreme rainfall and stuff like that. And I grew up on a farm in Mansfield. And so certainly seeing the way that extreme weather and shifting temperature patterns as well, impact the farm has been something that feels very direct and scary. And then I think the other piece of it is how I think about action. And I think that, obviously is evolving all the time, but certainly also in this kind of crazy political moment that we're in. I spend a lot of time thinking about how do we really bring people on board to take action in whatever way that we can, because it is so needed right now.
Yeah. I'd like to follow up on both of those kind of directions as you just mentioned. For whatever it's worth, just in the very least, kind of informing my questions. I also grew up in Connecticut.
Nice.
Also, early on in my childhood, had a timeline related environmental awakening that shaped a stretch of my earlier years of what is it that what path am I going to follow later on?
Yeah.
I have strayed in different directions from that over time overall, but it's still in there.
Yeah.
I feel from my experience growing up in Connecticut, it seemed kind of picking up on or maybe alongside of your observation that it seemed like climate change was something that might happen later, might happen elsewhere. It seemed growing up in Connecticut, it was very easy and it was very common among myself, folks that I grew up around, still encountered over years living in Connecticut again later on, that it seems to be an easy place for people to have their perspective kind of extend to like the circle of their town and the town next door,
Yeah.
and not necessarily see themselves connected to even the rest of our state, let alone our place in the greater world.
Right.
Is that something that you have also found, or, and if so, or regardless,
Yeah.
how, as you're now working and studying in the way that you do, and in the environmental sphere and living in Connecticut, how are you seeing people kind of collectively having a little bit of that realization that, this is happening now, we are a part of a bigger thing that's happening in our world?
Yeah. Okay, I don't know that I've super directly experienced people kind of thinking about climate change within the bounds of their town, the town next to them. I do think because Connecticut is so economically unequal and also so economically and racially segregated, and pollution largely follows those boundaries, unfortunately, I do think that there is very differing understandings of what does environmental impact look like, and the way that people experience that in relation to their health, and in relation to their lives more broadly certainly is very different across communities. And I think that is something that I see more clearly.
Can you speak a little bit about that? Maybe stepping away from the question, the way I asked it. Could you talk a little bit about how the differing, people have very differing experiences of climate change in different parts of our state?
Yeah. I mean, I think, so I guess to kind of think about let's say air pollution as one example, our cities have a lot of polluting facilities, and then being in Hartford right now, there are a lot of polluting facilities in this city. Things like power plants and incinerators and all of that are, really terrible for air quality. And then also highways and having feels like every highway in the state come through here certainly is also, not good for air quality either. And so I think that, that is one experience in a lot of more rural areas, but also wealthier and whiter areas don't experience those kind of same levels of polluting facilities and air quality issues. And then thinking about towns and cities on the coast and flooding and what that looks like for them. It was not something I thought about in Mansfield because we live on top of a hill, we would never flood. But certainly as sea levels rising and storms are getting worse, that becomes a bigger and bigger issue. So I think, definitely different things. And I would, argue that every place is impacted by climate change in some way and is dealing with environmental impacts, but the level of those impacts and how present they are definitely is very different. And also for folks, closer to New York City, ozone pollution is worse. And so just geographically, things are different as well.
Yeah. What is kind of the main, if there is at this point, what is kind of the main focus of your studies or the main focus of your interest at this point in time?
Yeah, I guess my studies and my work kind of go in two slightly different directions, I would say. My work is very focused on fossil fuel infrastructure in the state and thinking about how do we stop the construction or expansion of new and existing pieces of infrastructure, because unfortunately, even with the greenhouse gas reduction goals that we have, we still continue to see pushes for expansion across Connecticut and across New England as well. So that is where the majority of my work has been for the past couple of years. My school is a little bit more focused on climate policy more broadly and climate justice. And for me, thinking about what would state policy in Connecticut look like that addresses these issues.
Yeah. Is there, a direction or an aspect of state policy or a way that you, at this moment, would love to see state policy, transforming in the years to come?
Yeah, for sure.
What would you like to see?
I mean, I think, I guess going back to the piece around fossil fuel infrastructure, it has been incredibly frustrating that we have very strong or pretty strong greenhouse gas reduction goals. We are already falling behind on meeting those, and it is very, very frustrating to see that. So,
do you mean Connecticut state has? Yeah.
Yes. So Connecticut has a goal of I believe it's 45% greenhouse gas reductions by 2030 and a higher percent by 2050. and like net zero electricity by 2040. And we are, kind of going in the wrong direction with some of those, especially with the Trump administration now also adding more complications to the situation and barriers. So one kind of legislative thing would be to like remove barriers for renewable energy, removing caps on solar, making all of that easier, and then at the same time to really stop the permitting of fossil fuel infrastructure. And that, I would say, that's not always kind of directly within the legislature's control, but certainly there are things that they could do. There are bills that they could pass that would do work on that and would be really helpful. So that's kind of, I think, one side of it. And then I think at the same time, like with climate change, it impacts everything, and there's so many kind of different levels and layers. And so, housing obviously is this really big debate right now, especially with the housing bill that the governor vetoed. And so I do think that bills like that are also really critical because we need affordable housing that's hopefully also green, and that like allows people to do well, because climate change is impacting people at so many levels.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit more about that bill, from your perspective that just got vetoed, so its description could be a part of the conversation?
Okay, I don't know a ton, so I'm not sure that I'm able to like super explain what it is in a way that's effective. But I think broadly, like housing that is related to also like being near public transportation is really important, especially in a state like Connecticut that right now is like very car centric, especially maybe not in our cities. But yeah, having housing that's near public transportation that's affordable and then also is hopefully like energy efficient and all of that is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And to make sure, and just like I'm thinking of the right one, if I remember correctly, it was a housing bill that kind of promoted, more affordable housing in more parts of the state than it has been present so far, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if it was in the final version of the bill. It's HB 5002 is the bill, but originally it's from Desegregate Connecticut. I was one of the big people pushing for it. Our organizations, and it was called like Work, Live, Ride, and so I think the idea of like having affordable housing near transit hubs is to me like really exciting and exactly what we should be doing.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can see ways in which that would align with the work of kind of both prongs of what it is that you do.
Yeah.
Can you, I guess, like diving into perhaps it's related to the work side of things? Can you talk a little bit about ways that the fossil fuel expansion, fossil fuel infrastructure and expansion in our state is problematic, potentially?
Yeah. I guess I'll give a couple specific examples. So one is a project it's a power plant called the Capital Area System. So it's located here in Hartford, right near the Capitol. It's a power plant that I believe it powers 19 buildings, mostly state buildings and a few private ones. But it's polluting, obviously, the Hartford community and folks who live here all the time, not people who work in those buildings necessarily. And that power plant, the state did a study on it, looking at replacing it with more natural gas for a longer period of time versus replacing with geothermal. And the Department of Administrative Services decided to go with natural gas for whatever the next period of time. And I think decisions like that are so incredibly frustrating because when talking about not meeting our state's goals, like that is exactly the kind of decision that locks us into fossil fuels for decades to come. And so folks are pushing back on that. The community is pushing back on that, which is really important and really incredible, but certainly a very frustrating decision from the state, and also really frustrating to see, like Hartford is a place already, like we've been talking about, with this high pollution burden, and why are you allowing that to continue? Why is the state allowing that to continue is really frustrating. So I think that would be one example. And then another example, also kind of tying this, I think, more broadly to expansion that's being pushed by the Trump administration and being allowed in our region more broadly, is in Brookfield. And so, Brookfield is kind of, right near the New York border, and is on actually a couple of different interstate pipelines that carry gas through the region. And currently there is a compressor station in Brookfield, and compressor stations like regulate the pressure. in pipelines, and they are looking to like double the size of that station, so that it can release, or it will be able to release a lot more methane and other like toxic chemicals into the air. And I think it's also important to note that that one in particular is like 1,900 feet from a middle school. So it's really, kind of directly polluting the kids in this community. And that's one where if this gets built, that allows a bunch of expansion in New York to happen, and more broadly allows a lot of kind of gas to flow through the region more broadly, which I would argue is like exactly the wrong decision for us to be making right now.
Yeah, absolutely. How much of a role, what are some other energy avenues that are either developing in the region or existent in our region already that could conceivably lighten the load on the fossil fuel infrastructure, make it easier to dial that back in the years to come? And what successes and challenges do you see in those areas at this moment in time?
Well, wind energy is super exciting. Unfortunately, that one is facing obviously a massive amount of challenges from the Trump administration. And I think I do really appreciate that Connecticut and Rhode Island just sued over Trump's attempt to cancel Revolution Wind, which is like 80% complete, I believe. Very, very frustrating there. But in the future, I guess, or if it is possible to push back on the Trump administration with this, like all of that is to me very exciting and a great option. I think, like I mentioned, like solar is also an option. Obviously, we're not like the sunniest place ever, but there is enough sun here for that to be like a really important source. And there are, exciting ways to think about how do we integrate that into communities effectively, including for renters and for folks who can't directly put it on their homes. And then I think the other piece that's also important to mention is like there is a role for just, drawing down the amount of energy that we use and kind of lightening that existing load and whatever. And so thinking, about how do we make sure that homes are really energy efficient? Where can we put in like heat pumps and that kind of stuff, which has been super successful in Maine, which obviously is a lot colder than here. So could definitely, I think, work, here as well. And Connecticut does have some programs around energy efficiency and all of that, but expanding those, making sure that they're really accessible for folks, especially as federal subsidies and rebates have been taken away, is really important.
Yeah. What are some things that are, they're part of your mindset or on your mind, different ways that you see our impact on the world around us from a climate perspective that you wish other people, be they peers, be they folks who are older, folks, other community members in Connecticut, what are you aware of due to your studies and to your work that you wish other people were a bit more aware of as well, who don't have quite the same window into that world or that aspect of our world?
In terms of like how we're impacting the environment around us?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. To be honest, I think I struggle a little bit with this question just because climate change feels like this issue that is like so big and caused by so many large factors that I don't want to like put the blame on individuals. And I think at the same time, like doing what we can in our lives is important.
I mean, it could be like the answer could be in there. Like I hear what you're saying and recognize like individually, like that, like that's part of it. I mean, I think so. I don't know how. As an extension, I think of what I heard you saying. I don't know how many people appreciate how large a role some of the institutional forces in our society play in shaping the climate current and future.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess I would also, I think, again, thinking about kind of where we are right now in our world more broadly, I do think that like, thinking about this also in the context of like democracy and democracy being really critical for us addressing climate change, like that is also one where like in this moment that feels so important because, yeah, without that, I don't see how we address this. And I think so many issues kind of like interplay and overlap with climate change. And so, talking about housing or talking about whatever, like all of these other things are also, are interconnected. And so I think, I don't know. I would just say like being civically minded and like really kind of having a consideration of like how do these different issues overlap is something that I think it would be really nice to kind of bring more attention to, because like, yes, it is that extreme weather and that hurricane and whatever, like that is climate change, but it's also like extreme heat that makes it harder for people to stay cool in the summer or to afford their energy bills or whatever, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about how how have you crossed paths with Save the Sound in the past? How do you engage with those folks?
Yeah, I mean, so I've done my work, in Connecticut has been like across the last 7 years. I was in DC for a couple of years, but broadly within that time, I think Save the Sound is like one of the organizations doing really incredible work to push climate action forward. And a lot of my overlap has been around work at the state legislature and pushing for different pieces of legislation there. And Save the Sound, I think just has an incredible amount of knowledge and really incredible staff who are doing that work and who I feel really grateful to kind of work with. And so, lots of events together at the state capitol and, working together on legislation and other issues like that.
Yeah, and maybe something, maybe you could talk a little bit more about that in terms of, folks who even are, who live in Connecticut and do have an awareness of climate change, its impact, big picture, small picture. Talk a little bit more about the different people, organizations that you encounter and see doing good work, and the role that I don't know, you see that playing in the picture overall, if that question makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I think that there's like a big set of organizations who do like really incredible work at the state capitol. That is a really big and important thing. And so I would say, Save the Sound, Sierra Club, organizations like that do really important and great work there. And then there are other organizations I would say who focus a little bit more on maybe pushing forward clean energy, and some of that is through the legislature and some of that is through more direct work with towns. And so organizations like PACE, which stands for People's Action for Clean Energy, they do really cool work in that area. And then there are also like a lot of really localized organizations that I would kind of, I guess, encourage people to think about, just because I think sometimes, especially when like first entering into this space, finding those people who are like in your town, in your community can be really helpful. Lots of cool kind of local organizations or like town committees who are working on this as well. And then I think, there are different folks who are also working on the more kind of direct fossil fuel opposition. And so I help with a coalition called the No Pipeline Expansion Northeast Coalition. And that is across a few northeastern states, but largely focused on Connecticut. We're doing a lot of the direct fossil fuel stuff.
That's great. Is there anything that we haven't yet spoken about in this conversation that you either imagined before that we would, or at this moment you want to try and make sure is a part of this conversation?
I guess the kind of, I guess maybe again related to our current moment. I think the kind of thing that keeps coming up for me the more that I do this work, and that I felt strongly as a teenager and still very much feel now, is just like we really need political leaders and leaders more broadly who are willing to stand up and fight for action even when it is hard. And it's been really frustrating to, I think, not see that happen largely. And like there was a big climate bill a couple of years ago that got through the Connecticut House, and then the Senate never even called it for a vote. And a kind of very watered down version of it did pass last year. But it's been really frustrating to see the like glacial pace of action when we are facing a crisis that is so urgent and so like pressing in a time sensitive way. And obviously the federal government is going in completely the wrong direction right now. And And so it is even more important for the state to really take like meaningful and bold action. And I unfortunately don't feel like we've been seeing that. I think there have been certain actions that have been good. And like the Attorney General suing the Trump administration over the wind energy is really important. But broadly, I think it is really important that we see leaders stand up in a meaningful way. And like, as a young person who has engaged with politics since before I could vote, it's really frustrating to hear political leaders, say things about like, I care about young people, I, want to get higher youth turnout, and then it is hard to see where or if they're actually fighting for us.
Yeah, to see where they're, like, what choices are they making
that
support their desire to, work for young folks and include them in the process.
And their claims about being a climate champion. Like, if you're a climate champion, it's not about the words, it's about the actions. But
yeah. What are some, and it's okay if you repeat yourself,
okay.
Repeat what you've said in the past. Like, it's totally okay. What are some actions you would like to see a climate champion do? Like, what is something that a politician or a leader in some capacity who views themselves as a climate champion, what could they do to earn that title?
Yeah. I mean, I think at different levels and in different roles, what those actions will look like is different. But certainly if there's fossil fuel infrastructure that is proposed, I think, opposing that very strongly and publicly is critical. Working to support clean energy expansion, also really important. And then thinking about the other ways in which this impacts your community, and both how to prepare and, also how to mitigate is important. And so, some of that might be around like energy efficiency and building energy efficient and affordable housing, but then some of it might also be around like, okay, our town or city is really about to be flooded. How do we make sure that people are safe from that? And I do think, climate change is happening and will continue to happen. And so how do we ensure that we're resilient and ready to adapt is also a really big question, especially as a coastal state and also as a state that's experiencing like more extreme heat and those kind of impacts, which we're not prepared for because we're not necessarily a super hot place normally. And so also I think taking those like kind of adaptation actions are really important.
Sena, thank you so much for coming up to talk with me and to be a part of this project. It's really great to have you be a part of it.
Yeah, it was really nice to talk to you.
Thank you so much. You too. Yeah.